we will be starting our new chapter, that is the digestive system. And as you know that the digestive system consists of alimentary canal and the accessory organs, and there are variety of digestive processes that take place within the digestive system for the absorption and the digestion of the food. The alimentary canal begins at the mouth and then it passes through the thorax, abdomen, and pelvis, and it ends at the anus. It has a basic structure that we will discuss in our today's lecture, and that is very important because you will find region wise modifications, and we will study those modifications when we will cover the different organs of the digestive system. So you will find those modifications at different levels. So the objectives of our today's lecture are to cover the organs of the digestive system that consist of alimentary canal and the accessory organs, and then we will discuss about the basic structure of the alimentary canal. We will discuss about the different layers, the adventitia or serosa, that is the peritoneum in the gastrointestinal tract. Then we will discuss about the other layers, the muscle layer, submucosa, mucosa, and at the end we will discuss about the nerve supply as well. That is very important. The first point that we need to discuss is the various stages that occur in the digestive system, and we can divide the activities of the digestive system under the five stages. And the first stage is the ingestion of food. This is the first stage where you are taking your food into the alimentary canal. So this is taking of your food into the alimentary tract, that is eating and drinking. The next stage is the propulsion, and this is basically the mixing and movement of the food content along the alimentary canal. And in the oropharynx, that would be through the swallowing, and in the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine, that would be through the peristalsis. And you all already familiar with the process of peristalsis. Next we have the digestion, and the digestion has further stages, the mechanical digestion and the chemical digestion. So the mechanical digestion is the breakdown of the food by the mastication in the mouth, that is showing, and the churning movement in the stomach, and the segmentation in the small intestine. Next we have the chemical digestion, and various enzymes that will be secreted by the glands and the accessory organs of the digestive system will break down your food into smaller molecules for the easy absorption, and this is known as the chemical digestion. Next we have the absorption, and in the absorption the digested food substances will pass through the walls of some organs of the alimentary canal into the blood and lymph capillaries for the circulation to be used by the body cells. So the nutrients and water will be supplied to the blood vessels and the lymph vessels in the small intestine, and the water to the blood vessels will be absorbed in the large intestine. Next is the stage of elimination. So you know that the food substances that have been eaten but are not digested, and they are neither absorbed, they will be excreted out from the alimentary canal through the process of defecation, and this is the last stage of the digestive system. So the waste products will be excreted out through the anus. Now we will talk about the organs of the digestive system, and the first uh, we will talk about the alimentary canal. And the alimentary canal consists of the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and the rectum and anal canal. So the organs of the alimentary canal are highlighted with the white, and the accessory organs are highlighted with the yellow color. So the alimentary canal is consist of the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, the stomach, small intestine, and the large intestine, and also the rectum and anal canal. And the accessory organs are the tongue, the salivary glands, the three pairs of salivary glands, the pancreas that will pour its secretions into the GIT, the liver, and biliary tract. And these organs and glands are linked physiologically as well as anatomically in the digestion and absorption. Okay, now we will talk about the basic structure of the alimentary canal. And as I have told you earlier, that you will find region-wise modifications in this basic structure. So this is very important for you to get to know about this basic structure, to understand this basic structure. So there will be the adventitia or serosa first of all. Okay, this is a cross section, and this cross section is showing the various layers of the digestive system. So the first layer that we are going to discuss is the serosa or adventitia, and this serosa will be the peritoneum in the gastrointestinal tract, that is the outer covering. Next is the muscle layer, and this muscle layer has two patterns in the GIT tract. The outer layer will be a pattern of longitudinal muscles, and the inner layer would have a pattern of circular muscles. So this is the muscle layer, and then next comes the submucosa. And you already know that the submucosa in histology is a layer of connective tissue that lies deep to the mucosa, and it basically allows the mucosa to move more flexibly during the peristalsis. So it basically provides a support to the mucosa. And the mucosa is the inner layer of the epithelial lined hollow organ. Any hollow organ that is hollow would definitely have epithelial lining, for example the uterus, the bladder, and the trachea. So the GIT tract composed of various organs that are hollow, so definitely they will be lined by the epithelium. So the mucosa will be the inner layer of any epithelial lined hollow organ, and it consists of the epithelium itself, and there will be a supporting loose connective tissue layer that is called the lamina propria that will be lying immediately beneath the epithelium. And in GIT there will be a next layer beneath the lamina propria, that would be the muscular layer, and we will discuss it in our coming slide. So just remember that the submucosa is a connective tissue layer, and it will provide support to the mucosa, and it will allow the mucosa to move with flexibility during the peristalsis. And the mucosa is the inner lining of any hollow organ, and it will be composed of epithelium itself, and there will be a supporting loose connective tissue layer beneath the epithelium that we call the lamina propria. And then we said that in the gastrointestinal tract there will be another layer beneath the lamina propria, that would be the muscular layer. Let's study this slide in detail. So the mucosa is the inner lining, as I have told you earlier. So definitely there will be the epithelium, and there will be the glands as well. The opening of the glands, the lamina propria, that is composed of connective tissue, and definitely there will be capillaries, the enteric neurons, that is related to the autonomic nervous system, the immune cells, and the last layer will be the muscularis mucosa beneath the lamina propria. So this is the mucosa of the gastrointestinal tract, and this is basically composed of three layers: the epithelium, the lamina propria, that is the connective tissue, and the last one is the muscularis mucosa. Next is the submucosa, and as I have told you that it will be composed of connective tissue and it will provide support to the mucosa. And you will also find the larger blood and lymph vessels, so the glands, and there will be submucosal plexus here, that is related to the nerve supply of the gastrointestinal tract, and we will discuss it in more detail in our next slides. Next we have the muscularis externa, that is composed of the circular and longitudinal muscle layer, and between the circular and the longitudinal muscle layer there will be another plexus, the mesenteric plexus, and the outermost layer is the serosa. Okay, so now we will talk about these layers individually, and the first layer that we are going to talk about is the adventitia or serosa. As I have told you earlier that this is the outermost layer, and in the thorax it consists of loose fibrous tissue, but in the abdomen the organs are covered by a serous membrane that is called the peritoneum. So the peritoneum is the largest serous membrane of the body, and it is a closed sac that contains a small amount of serous fluid. As you already know that the serous membrane will definitely secrete the serous fluid, so it contains a small amount of serous fluid as well within the abdominal cavity. And this peritoneum is richly supplied with the blood and lymph vessels, and it contains the lymph nodes as well. So this is a physical barrier to local spread of infection. For example, the appendicitis, if we talk about the appendicitis, then you know that the appendicitis is the inflammation of appendix, and in the late stages of appendicitis it can perforate, and if it perforates then it can definitely involves the other organs of GIT as well. So there will be very easy spread of infection. So the function of the peritoneum is to provide the physical barrier for this local spread of infection. The peritoneum has two layers: the parietal peritoneum, that you can appreciate in this figure, the parietal peritoneum which lines the abdominal wall. So this is the interior abdominal wall, this one here, this is the interior abdominal wall, and the parietal peritoneum is lining this abdominal wall. Next is the visceral peritoneum. So definitely this is the visceral peritoneum, so that will cover the organs within the abdominal and the pelvic cavities. These two layers, the visceral peritoneum and the parietal peritoneum, as you can see, these are in close contact. So the friction will be prevented by the presence of serous fluid that will be secreted by the peritoneal cells. Now we will talk about some other terminologies that are very important, and we will talk about the intraperitoneal, the retroperitoneal structures, and we will also discuss about the mesentery and the greater omentum and the lesser omentum. So starting with the intraperitoneal and retroperitoneal organs, the abdominal viscera can be divided anatomically by their relationship to the peritoneum into two groups, the intraperitoneal and the retroperitoneal organs. If we talk about the intraperitoneal organs, then just remember that the intraperitoneal organs will be enveloped by the visceral peritoneum that will cover the organs not only from interiorly but it will cover those organs from the posterior aspect as well. So the intraperitoneal organs will be covered by the peritoneum completely, and the examples for the intraperitoneal organs are the stomach, liver and spleen. You can see the liver in this section. It is covered by the peritoneum completely. There is another example of the intraperitoneal structure, the jejunum, and you can see that the jejunum is completely covered by the peritoneum, so that's why we are calling it the peritoneal organ. If we talk about the retroperitoneal organs, then these organs are not associated with the visceral peritoneum, and they will be covered in the parietal peritoneum, and the parietal peritoneum will cover them from the interior surface only. We can divide these retroperitoneal structures in further groups on the basis of their embryological development. We can group them in primarily retroperitoneal organs and secondarily retroperitoneal organs. The primary retroperitoneal organs developed and they remain outside of the parietal peritoneum, and the examples include the esophagus, rectum and kidneys. These are the example of primarily retroperitoneal organs. The secondary retroperitoneal organs were initially intraperitoneal, and through the course of the embryogenesis they became retroperitoneal later. Thus in adults, the only interior surface of these organs will be covered, and the examples of the secondarily retroperitoneal organs include the ascending and the descending colon. I hope that you are clear about the intraperitoneal and retroperitoneal structures, and also you are clear about the peritoneum and its two layers. Now we will talk about the mesentery, that is the double layer of the visceral peritoneum, and it connects the intraperitoneal organ to the posterior abdominal wall. So it provides a pathway for nerves, blood vessels and lymphatics to travel from the body wall to the viscera. So once again, here you can see the mesentery that we have said this is the double layer of the visceral peritoneum, and what it does, it connects an intraperitoneal organ, for example the jejunum. In this section you can see that the mesentery here, which is the double layer of the visceral peritoneum, this is connecting the jejunum to the posterior abdominal wall. This is the interior part of this slice, and this is the posterior part of this slice. So this is an example of the intraperitoneal organ, that is the jejunum, and here you can see the mesentery, that is the double layer of the visceral peritoneum, and this is connecting the jejunum to the posterior abdominal wall. So it provides a pathway for the nerves, blood vessels and lymphatics to travel from the body wall to the viscera. Another important thing about mesentery is naming it. So the mesentery of the small intestine is simply called the mesentery, but if we talk about the mesentery of the appendix and the colons, then we name them according to the name of these viscera. For example, the sigmoid mesocolon and the mesoappendix. Okay, now we will learn about another terminology, that is the omentum. And the omentum is a sheet of visceral peritoneum that extend from the stomach and the proximal part of the duodenum to other abdominal organs. This is very important to remember. The mesentery was a double fold of the visceral peritoneum, and it was connecting an intraperitoneal structure to the posterior abdominal wall. But the omentum is a sheet of visceral peritoneum that extends from the stomach and the proximal part of the duodenum, and it attaches to the other abdominal organs. For example, if we talk about the lesser and the greater omentum, first of all we will talk about the greater omentum. You can see the greater omentum here, and the greater omentum, what it does, it descends from the greater curvature of the stomach. Let me tell you about the greater curvature of the stomach. Okay, so this is the greater curvature of the stomach, and this is the lesser curvature of the stomach. So in the greater omentum, the omentum will descend from the greater curvature of the stomach and the proximal part of the duodenum. Then it will fold back and it will attach itself to the interior surface of the transverse colon. So the greater omentum is starting from the greater curvature of the stomach and the proximal part of the duodenum. Then it folds back up and it attaches itself to the interior surface of the transverse colon. Next we will talk about the lesser omentum. This is the lesser omentum, and the lesser omentum is the first point is that it is considerably smaller than the greater omentum, and it attaches from the lesser curvature of the stomach and the proximal part of the duodenum to the liver. This is the liver, and you can see that it is attaching to the liver. So once again, the omentum is a sheet of visceral peritoneum that extend from the stomach and proximal part of the duodenum to other abdominal organs. In greater omentum, this will arise from the greater curvature of the stomach. Then it will fold back up and it will attach to the interior surface of the transverse colon. And if we talk about the lesser omentum, then the lesser omentum will attach from the lesser curvature of the stomach and the proximal part of the duodenum to the liver. So I really hope that now you understand the omentum, the mesentery, and the layers of the peritoneum, and the intraperitoneal and the retroperitoneal organs. So this completes the adventitia or serosa of the gastrointestinal tract. And here is a mnemonic to help in recalling which abdominal viscera are the retroperitoneal, and this mnemonic is SAT pucker. So S for suprarenal or adrenal glands, A is aorta, D is duodenum except the proximal 2 centimeter, P is pancreas, U for ureters, C is ascending and descending parts, the colon, and we have discussed earlier about the ascending and descending colon, that these are the secondarily retroperitoneal structures. So these will also be included. Next we have the K for kidneys, the esophagus, and the rectum. The next layer is the muscle layer, and the muscle layer, we have already discussed about it, that uh, this consists of two layers of smooth muscle. That means it will be not under our control, and the muscle fibers of the outer layer are arranged longitudinally. You can see the pattern of the longitudinal layer. The muscle fibers are arranged in a longitudinal pattern, and this is the outer layer, while the inner layer that encircle the wall of the tube, it has the muscle fibers that are lying in the circular pattern. And you will find the blood vessels, lymph vessels, and a plexus of sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves that is called mesenteric plexus, and this plexus is really very important. Basically, there is an enteric plexus that consists of mesenteric and the submucosal plexus. The mesenteric is found in the muscle layers between the outer and the inner layers of the muscularis layer. And the next plexus is the submucosal plexus that you can find in the submucosal layer. Once again, we are talking about the enteric plexus. What is enteric plexus? First of all, this is a very complex autonomic nerve plexus inside the walls of the gastrointestinal tract, and you will find it from the esophagus to anus. And what it does, its function is to control the motor functions, the local blood flow, the mucosal transport, and the secretions, and it will also modulate the immune and endocrine functions. So the mesenteric plexus, it can be found between the inner round and the outer layers of the muscularis externa, that is the muscularis layer. You will find the mesenteric plexus between the outer and the inner layers of the muscularis. And next is the submucosal plexus that you will find in the submucosa. So the contraction and relaxation of these muscle layers occurs in waves that will push the contents of the food onwards, and we know that this type of contraction of the smooth muscle is called the peristalsis, and this is under the influence of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. Next we will talk about the submucosa. This is the submucosal layer, and I have told you earlier that this consists of loose irregular connective tissue, and it also contains the collagen and the elastic fibers that will bind the muscle layer to the mucosa. So this provides support to the mucosa, and within it there will be blood vessels, nerves, lymph vessels, and varying amount of lymphoid tissue as well. You can see different structures in the submucosa, and these are the glands in the submucosa, the ducts from the glands. Okay, now we will talk about the mucosa, and as I have told you earlier that the mucosa consists of three layers: the epithelium, the lamina propria, and the muscularis. So the mucous membrane will be formed, or the epithelium will be formed by the columnar epithelium, and it has three main functions: to protect, and to secrete, and to absorb the food. So these are the functions of the epithelium. Next is the lamina propria, that consists of loose connective tissue, and it provides support to the blood vessels. and these blood vessels will nourish the lymphoid tissue that protects against the microbial invaders. You can see the lymphatic nodules here in the mucosa. Another very important point about the epithelium is that it modifies according to the region. As I have told you earlier, that there will be region-wise modification in the gastrointestinal tract. So where the wear and tear is greater, or there are the chances for the mechanical injury. The layer will consist of stratified squamous epithelium with goblet cells. In areas where the food is already soft and moist, the uh, epithelium will modify, and you will find the epithelium will be replaced by the columnar epithelial cells, and you will find the goblet cells here. As you know that the function of the goblet cell is to secrete the mucus, and the mucus will lubricate the walls of the tract, and it will provide a physical barrier that will protect the wall from the effects of the digestive enzymes. The below this surface, in the region where it is lined with the columnar epithelium, you will find the collections of specialized cells or glands that will release various secretions into the lumen of the tract, and these secretions include the saliva from the salivary glands, the gastric juice from the gastric glands, intestinal juice from the intestinal glands, pancreatic juice from the pancreas, and bile from the liver. So the function of these digestive juices is to chemically break down the food. Now we will talk about the nerve supply. There will be parasympathetic and sympathetic nerve supply, and I have told you earlier that the enteric plexus will be responsible for this nerve supply. The parasympathetic nerve supply will be by the vagus nerve and the sacral nerves. The vagus nerve will supply that is the cranial nerve, so it will supply most of the alimentary canal and the accessory organs, and the sacral nerve will supply the most of the distal part of the gastrointestinal tract. And the effect of this parasympathetic stimulation on the digestive system is to increase the muscular activity, the peristalsis, and what it will do, it will increase the activity of the mentoric plexus, that we have already discussed, that the mentoric plexus lies between the two layers of the muscularis. So definitely it will increase the activity of the muscles, and ultimately that will increase the process of peristalsis. And another function is that it will increase the glandular secretion through the increased activity of the submucosal plexus. So this is the effect of parasympathetic nerve supply on the gastrointestinal tract. Next we have the sympathetic nerve supply, and this will be arising from the spinal cord in the thoracic and the lumbar regions. The effects of sympathetic stimulation on the digestive system are to decrease the muscular activity, the opposite of parasympathetic supply. So it will decrease the muscular activity, especially the peristalsis, because there will be reduced stimulation of the mentoric plexus, and it will also decrease the glandular secretion by decreasing the stimulation of the submucosal plexus. So the sympathetic supply has the opposite function to the parasympathetic supply. So once again, the parasympathetic supply will be supplied by the vagus nerve and the sacral nerves, and the function of the parasympathetic is to increase the peristalsis by increasing the function of the mentoric plexus, and the glandular secretion by increasing the activity of the submucosal plexus. And the sympathetic supply, that will be through the various nerves of arising from the spinal cord of the thoracic and lumbar region. And the effect of the sympathetic stimulation on the digestive system are to decrease the muscular activity and to decrease the glandular secretion by reducing the activities of both plexus, the mesenteric and the submucosal plexus. So that's all for today, and if you have any question regarding today's lecture, then you can ask. Thank you so much.